Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for our first event of 2026, Unveiling Equity, Gaza, Witnessing, and the Shifting Compass of Humanity. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future, and our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And here at Fourth Space, we continue to work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things happening all across our university. We're running today's event as both a live stream to YouTube and as a Zoom meeting. So if you're joining us by Zoom or YouTube, we welcome your comments or questions via the chat. Those of you here in the space, if you have any comments or questions a little later on, just raise your hand and we'll run a microphone over to you. With that, it's very much my pleasure to hand the microphone over to our host for this morning, as well as the manager for the Center for the Study of Learning and Performance, Zeina Ismail Allouche. Good morning. Great to have you back.
Thank you so much. على هذه الأرض ما يستحق الحياة. تردد نيسان، رائحة الخبز في الفجر. أول الحب عشب على حجر، وأمهات يقفن على خيطناي، وخوف الغزاة من الذكريات. محمود درويش. We have on this earth what makes life worth living. April's hesitations, the aroma of bread at dawn, the beginning of love, grass growing on a stone, mothers living on a flute's sigh, and the invader's fear of memories. Mahmoud Darwish. Allow me to begin by expressing our deep gratitude to the Center for the Study of Learning and Performance, CSLP, for supporting this third reiteration of the Unveiling Equity series. I would like also to extend my gratitude to the Fourth Space amazing team, and also to our partnering entities, the Canadian Practitioners Network for the Prevention of Extremist Violence, CPN-PREV, and the Indigenous Healing Knowledges Chair. This would not have been possible without you helping us in holding a space for this vital conversation. Your collective support reflects on a shared commitment to reciprocal relationality and to the ongoing work of decolonizing academia. Ironically enough, we are hosted in academia and we claim decolonizing academia. On these notes, we would like to arrive in this encounter without preceding titles or claims to authority. We are instead grounded in relation, responsibility, and presence. It's on these grounds that I would like to welcome you, Samah Jabr, and I'm removing the doctor, not as an attempt to decrease impact, but also to welcome the human being, the person you are. On the same terms, I would like to welcome you, Ghayda Hassan, and if you allow me both, we would like to embark on this very sensitive topic. We claim that the war has ended, but this is not the reality, because the killing continues. What remains are the legacies of unrelenting mass death and total demolition. Homes reduced to rubble, roads erased, schools, playgrounds, laughters turned into ruins. Yet we resist, and on this resistance, I would like to start by congratulating you, Samah, for your new book, Radiance in Pain and Resilience, the Global Reverberation of Palestinian Historical Trauma. Your book was published on July 2025. And from that book, we would like to start by inviting you to talk about who you are and how is your positionality shaping the way you understand and we understand mental health while we observing this massive killing.
Well, thank you very much, Zeina, for this introduction. And I would like to thank all the organizers of this event. It's a pleasure for me to be here. But most importantly is that you have not forgotten the plight and the struggle for the Palestinians. And I think we should continue and persist educating people about what's happening in Palestine, not only in order to help the Palestinians in their struggle, also because there are moral and professional lessons that come from Palestine, that can be generated from Palestine, and that can be useful to many nations and to many marginalized and racialized groups in the world. So I'm glad that you are hosting this event, even outside even after the false announcement of an end to genocide in Gaza. A little bit about who I am. I'm a Palestinian from Jerusalem, and I have worked for 20 years as a psychiatrist and for 10 years as the head of mental health services for the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Now, my commitment with the Ministry of Health is over, but I continue doing a lot of clinical work with patients in Jerusalem and in the West Bank, and I contribute effectively to policy making in the field of mental health in Palestine as a consultant for several NGOs working in Palestine. And I do regional work also, educating people about a decolonial approach to mental health. My positionality as a Palestinian person living under occupation and as a professional who was exposed to all kinds of Western education in the field of medicine and mental health has put me in this unique position to question the applicability of Western assumptions in mental health to the reality where I work. I learned a lot from Western institutions, but the most important lessons come from the patients. And my patients teach me every day to raise doubts and questions about the applicability of Western interventions and Western evidence-based science in the Palestinian reality under occupation and threat. So I try to share my conclusions with my colleagues locally and internationally by writing about it. And maybe later I can explain some of these doubts about the hegemonous assumptions in Western psychiatry.
Thank you so much for this, for this grounding, so we know who you are. Ghayda, can you also speak about your experience? You've been in Canada for long years now, but you still carry home and the cause within you. So,
yeah, thank you. Yes, it's going to be 30 years soon that I'm in Canada, and I often say that I'm a typical product of colonialism and colonial elites, unfortunately. And the process of decolonizing myself is a lifelong process. I have been working on it, and it's very interesting because I was speaking in one of my classes about the fact that I was lucky to learn to study in a French school in Lebanon and to learn French and to be introduced to, the whole European geography, history, etc. And a student from the back of the class told me, "You say you're lucky, but at what cost?" And this is exactly it, the cost of colonization, which is truly, individually, socially, and collectively, the cost of erasure. Unlearning of one's origins, cultures, ways of doing, ways of being, ways of breathing, ways of walking, ways of singing, dancing, eating, and learning a new way of being, which in psychological terms really is about learning for self, as Winnicott would say it. That comes in, although he didn't work on colonialism at all, but to wear this mask for so long, and where you become your own oppressor. You don't even need the oppressors anymore. You self-oppress, you self-censor. And the Palestinian question is the epitome. It's at the heart of self-silencing and self-oppression. And in my case, gathering the courage, because academic institutions give you freedom, but they also signify to you that there is a big cost to the freedom if you really embody it. And so, collecting the courage to be able to bring back and use my voice to bring back the importance of Palestinian history, of Palestinian lives and culture, has truly become my way of regaining my freedom, personally and academically as well.
Mm-hmm. We are just going into the topic. Yeah, we're hitting into it. So you spoke, Ghayda, about the unmasking, the demystification, the unlearning of the colonial ideology into mental health specifically, because it's the ideology, but it's also a system, a structure that imposes itself on us. And here I would like to go back to Samah and ask you, how were you able to challenge or to deconstruct this mode, this approach, this worldviews on mental health, especially that you are witnessing firsthand what's happening?
It's an old story. First, maybe I will share some anecdotes and stories from the past to help you understand what I put as a theory regarding psychological imperialism. Let me tell you that when I was in the 4th grade in one of Jerusalem schools, we studied the story of Robinson Crusoe. It was a simplified version of it to teach us English, but it was presented as the story of the resilience of a white man who finds himself on the shores of an island. So he discovered the island. He had a sense of entitlement for that island. And one day he discovered that there are people living there. He saw the footprints of human beings. He looks around and he sees them ready to eat one of their own. He calls them savages, cannibals, and he maintains his feeling of entitlement to that island. He saves the person who was supposed to be eaten, and he found him on Friday. He calls him Friday. So at that young age, I was curious, what would the story be if it were told from the point of view of Friday? Would he tell the same story? Is it true that they were preparing to eat him? Was that white? I couldn't understand white saviorism at that time, but I was curious about an alternative story. When I became a medical student, I remember there were a group of British doctors who came to help us study the basic sciences because it was the first medical school established for Palestinians. And we didn't have Palestinian medical academics, people who can teach us within our own community. And at a certain point, we were preparing for exams, and the surgeon, the British surgeon, wanted us to make sure that every one of us can do per rectum examination. And we explained that the patients would not allow us to do that. So he proposed that we pay 5 shekels for any patient, and he would let us do the exam. The first student who followed that advice received a punch in his face. So the assumption of the British doctor was not culturally appropriate. So this kind of exposure to education, stories, and the reaction of people to the British doctor's advice provoked me to think differently. In the field of mental health, there is overemphasis on evidence-based science. And usually this evidence is not produced in Palestine. Most of the programs in mental health in Palestine are financed by international organizations. And they want to make sure that we don't do common sense interventions, but something that is that matches with the best evidence, with the evidence-based science. We talk about best evidence. I'm not denying evidence, statistics, and the scientific methodology in the work in the field of mental health. But we are confronted with a situation where the assumptions don't work. For example, I remember publishing something 2 weeks following the attack on Gaza, a paper that was published in The Lancet, where I described that all what we have prepared as policymakers in the field of medicine and mental health, all what we have prepared has been destroyed in Gaza. How can we provide interventions when there is no safety, under relentless bombardment, when the staff that we trained themselves became homeless, lost family members, sustained amputations, and severe injuries? So the reality on the ground forces us to think in a different way. And that was a moment of modesty and humbleness for me and many of my colleagues, because we gave up what we assumed that would work effectively in time of crisis, because the crisis we were exposed to was unprecedented. And we started observing and learning from the organic ways that the people are doing in order to help themselves. It became clear for me that the best intervention in the face of evil is natural, spontaneous human kindness, expressed by the doctors, by the neighbors, the virtues of the society, people gathering collectively, talking about what's happening to them, collaborating in order to solve the problem of where to get, for example, how to get clean water, how to protect the small spaces that are not yet demolished and distribute the available resources among themselves. So I think that was a moment when the organic ways that people knew without the influence of experts became more important than what we thought is the right way to react to this situation. the care of the community, the importance of collective processing of the traumatic situation that was happening. They became very important, and those were important. It was an opportunity for us to learn from the people. We saw volunteers trying to return some childhood experiences to children by gathering them, helping them to play music, to draw, to chant. And one last thing that I want to say now, maybe later we will elaborate on it. Spirituality, it became to us that spirituality is a very important resource for the Palestinian people. They ground themselves in the most difficult time when there are no resources in their spirituality, in their faith, which helps them do the cognitive processing of all what's going on around them. And I have to say that I learned a lot from the stories that people tell me, and from the way in which they make meaning and make sense of the senseless that is around them.
Thank you so much for sharing this. And I feel myself going back to the words of Darwish when he spoke about the fear of the invaders from memories and the collective memories. I would like to go back to you, Ghayda, because you spoke about that price, the cost. And Samah spoke a bit about the deconstruction of what she called, and I'm quoting her, psychological imperialism, which is a statement. And it's not only about rethinking interventions, as much as also about deconstructing the worldviews itself. So how do you navigate that space when we know that funds are important and we hear it everywhere? You need to prove, you have to dwell on evidence-based, scientific sounded results when there is when there is no place for the personal account, the narratives, the stories of resistance, the collective resistance as described by Samah. Where do you see yourself in this tension?
Navigating a very, very slippery space. And this brings me to 2 points. I think one of the main mistakes that evidence-based science has done and not understood is that there is no evidence that is not situated evidence. In vacuum, evidence does not exist. All research findings and every single evidence is contextual and situated. But this, you need to have a decolonial framework to understand it, because colonial frameworks tend to universalize the evidence and remove it from its context. And so I think reintroducing the importance of contextualized, situated evidence as only one and a limited form of knowledge that exists, and that there is a big set of knowledge. And the other problem with evidence is the overemphasis and overvaluing of quantitative evidence at the expense of the deep-rooted qualitative evidence that does exist. So really this whole evidence-based environment needs to be deconstructed. And it's something we use. And as Samah is saying, it's not to be thrown in the garbage. It is to be understood that this is situated. It's one little piece of a big world of knowledge. The other thing that I wanted to bring, and that, listening to Samah and you, I'm kind of associating on that, is the fact that imperialism in psychology or in the health sciences and colonialism's endeavor is typically to destroy collective solidarities and collective knowledges and organic knowledges in order to fracture the natural, organic ways of people getting together, becoming, helping each other in natural disasters, in human disasters, in simply somebody dying, a child accidentally and tragically dying in a community. Communities organically tend to organize and become solidaire, united, and try to find ways and ancestral ways and new ways and integrate new ways. But imperialistic or hegemonic approaches to mental health tend to destroy these ways, because the idea is to make individuals dependent on the mental health and the psychosocial institution. That is, institutions that is put in place by colonial powers in the end to benefit those who are in place in those institutions. And this has to be understood. As long as this is not understood, even without, if somebody can say, well, a CLSC or a health institution in Quebec is not colonial towards Quebec-born people, whatever, things that could be said, or in Canada. It's the system, it's the way the system is structured and organized that has to be understood. This is what colonial is about. It's not just about people coming and invading other people. It's about a whole economic, social, health, medical infrastructure that is put in place to basically fracture, not only to erase memories and to erase ways of doing, but to actually fracture those ways of doing so that it becomes practically impossible for collective communities to build and bring on that knowledge. And the end result of it is the collective communities reproducing internally the colonial dynamics and the colonial violence. So this is something that has to be understood by every single person working in the psychological and mental health space, to be able to gradually change our way of working, but hopefully gradually even change the way that organizations and institutions are working. And the way that it plays out in Palestine, but also in many other countries, is the connection of when those infrastructures, there is a reason why the first people who are killed during invasions are doctors and nurses and mental health professionals and journalists and photographers. And the first things that are destroyed are infrastructures, so that the invading power can put its own structures, or alternately, when you have a set of allies, to feed the humanitarian aid dark side. I'm not saying it's all dark, but there is that dark side. And to render the people completely powerless in front of those institutions and to create that dependency. This has to be understood, and this is where profound resistance lies when you are a mental health practitioner, is to undo those systems and to shed the light on the violence that those systems are producing.
So you're emphasizing this internalization of this violence towards the self, but also towards others. And you are highlighting the importance of resistance, again, within this, like within oneself and within the system. And from here, I would like to go back to you, Samah, because it's easy to speak about resistance when we have the privilege of distance. So how do you live it in the space? How do you resist and keep that voice alive?
Let me make it a little bit wider. I want to talk about agency. And resistance is one way to express agency, but there are other ways as well. And, Western the Western lens, when they look at what's happening in Palestine, they talk all the time about trauma and PTSD. I think Palestinians have a different ontological language to describe their predicament and different epistemology. It is rare that a patient comes to my clinic and talk about trauma. If they talk about exposure to trauma, usually they mean a car accident. In relation to what's happening politically, they talk about zulm, they talk about ibtila. And so it's a different language than trauma. With ibtila, there is also moral responsibility.
Can we try to translate ibtila?
Trial.
Okay.
A trial. I don't know if you have a better translation than this, but
what about zulm as well?
Sorry, zulm is not simply injustice, because injustice can happen by neglect or unintentionally. Zulm is intentional injustice, deliberate injustice. So this is how they refer to the traumatic effect that is inflicted on them by political violence. They rarely use the word trauma. Now, all the literature that's being written about Palestine, which tries to explain by experts, sometimes local experts and often international experts, because it is trying to speak to the world, so they use the language of the West, the dominant language in the field of mental health. So I best describe the trauma in Palestine as colonial historical trauma, which is also intentional and has the objective of canceling people's agency, rendering them helpless. All the violence that is taking place, it has an objective to make us give up completely, to live as shadows of human beings if we want to live on this land. And you probably feel and know that the feeling of helplessness is not restricted to Palestinians. Many people who watch what's happening to Palestinians, they talk about their helplessness. And in the absence of agency and a capacity to respond to this situation, people feel guilty. So usually, I hear it often from people outside Palestine, we feel guilty, we feel helpless regarding what's happening to Palestinians. Now, I want to talk about the centrality of agency in my view of in how I view psychotherapy in Palestine. I think that this is something that I learned from one of my patients. Let me share with you. Let me try to translate it and share with you. So this patient talks about her distress and she's expressing passive death wish. And then she reassures me. She says, but it's normal. The Virgin Mary, when she was exposed to the pain of labor and the pain of ostracization from the society, because she was pregnant without a father for her baby, she said, يا ليتني مت قبل هذا. I wish I have died before this. وكنت نسيا منسيا. I wish I was in oblivion. And then she continues, and she says that she had a revelation, وهزي إليك بجذع النخلة. So the revelation was, push towards you the trunk of the palm tree. It will give you ripened dates. Mm-hmm. So according to the understanding of the person who was talking to me, of this patient who was telling me. So the stress is legitimate. Even a death wish and feeling tired of life is legitimate. But we need to do something in order to get out of it, even if it is symbolic. Like, imagine a woman in labor and pain pushing with the limited strength that she has the trunk of the palm tree. So I think that this understanding, this spiritual grounding for many Palestinians, it helps them find their agency and their little ways, their little things that they can do in their personal battle, which is part of the national battle. So people can choose what they can do about their situation. Maybe I can give you another example also that I heard from how people apply spiritual understanding in dealing with their difficulties. So someone was talking to me about the abandonment of the Palestinian people, of the people in Gaza, by the world, by everybody. And then he consoles himself. He says, but Prophet Yusuf was abandoned. His brothers betrayed him, the 11 brothers. They dropped him in the well. And it didn't finish there. Some people found him, some merchants found him and made him a slave. And then he went there, he was exposed to false accusation and he went to prison. And he goes on and on with with this story to say that betrayal and abandonment are not unique to us. And the legendary stories in the Quran, they are there to teach us important lessons that will help us be patient and survive these very difficult times. So if this happened to prophets, why it wouldn't happen to us? And the meaning that he draws from these stories is that we will be patient with these trials, with this ibtila, until there will be another moment. So again, I want to say that it's a different ontological language, different epistemology, and different way of making meaning. Often we want to provide something tangible, materialistic, but people find many solutions in the abstract, many solutions in their imagination of the world, in their prospect, in how they view the world and the meaning of the world. And this amazes me. This amazes me because often when I feel, okay, what can we give this person? They come up with solutions that work for them, that are sometimes beyond our thinking and imagination.
It's very inspiring, Samah, and I would like to go back to Ghayda on those notes, specifically talking about how we resource ourselves to exist, to assume that agency. When I spoke about the privilege of being away, whereas people in the front line are enduring risks, yet also when we are here, we are also enduring different risks. We have the privilege, yet we endure risks. And when we want to resource ourselves here and prove something, we feel that we're obliged to quote, to think about a writer, a book. Yet we're hearing Samah and we're seeing that the real sources that make people stand up and exist and be present and assume that agency are mainly coming from the legacy, the history, the spiritual aspect. Again, how can we make this balance? And I'm here compelled to think about the indigenous ways of healing that also is grounded in narratives, in oral history, in learning from elders.
Absolutely. I think that, speaking about books and poems and coding, books are history too, and books bring spirituality. Books often teach, and poets teach a lot about the culture that many of us have become disconnected with. Whether we're born here or not, regardless of our ethnic or religious origin, many of us are actually disconnected from the histories, from the oral histories, from the narrative histories, from the cultural ways of doing and being that our collective or our ancestors had. And this is just the nature of the way that the online world functions, or the way that modern societies function a little bit with this globalization and its impacts on erasing some of those more minority narratives, if I can say. I think the way that works with, at least that I have been witnessing or experiencing, is relationships, connections. I think a lot of people who are in the same space as I am today are healing through connecting with one another, through being able to have those spaces where we can share our experiences, where we can share the way that we're feeling. I think it's a lot coming from connecting back with languages, with history that you mentioned, oral history, but many of us are returning towards narrative history. One of the things that I have been seeing, and where a lot of agency, our people are finding agency, is trying to connect back to their parents and grandparents and recording them, asking them the questions that their parents or grandparents never answered or never told them about their stories. Why? Because there is this feeling that there is an erasure. And so across the world, I'm actually connecting with people who are now going and seeking their Palestinian grandparents and parents and trying to record what they remember, trying to bring out all those objects that accompanied them through their lives, and they found agency through this, to give them a voice, but also to find some form of agency. So there are many ways, but most of them seem to be reconnecting to a way of being and to a way of doing that has been, I wouldn't say lost, I think that has been hidden.
Or rendered to silence.
Or rendered to silence.
And there is an act of reclaiming identity,
yes,
legacy, heritage, language.
Yeah.
And it's not by coincidence that language was a major source for punishment for in residential schools where indigenous children were separated from their families, communities, and they were punished if they ever used their language, as if language is not only words, it's about meanings, it's about heritage, it's about identity, it's about culture, it's about standing up again. Yeah. While we are discussing now, and I would claim that I'm enjoying warmth of the space, even if Canada is cold, but we have coats, we have ways of avoiding the cold. Yet we know now that Palestine, Lebanon as well, are witnessing a storm. Many children are living in tents. And you spoke, Samah, about meeting the basic needs as a major basic human, I would use right, but unfortunately even this rights-based language has has been placed in that colonial also framework of language. How do we meet those needs? What can we do? We spoke about this guilt feeling, how we can make those needs more present, how we make this voice more heard, because the needs are now. There are killing, but there are children who are cold now.
Obviously, it's not up to us to meet those needs. Those needs need to be met by governments, institutions. It's a political decision to keep the people in Gaza deprived of their basic needs. You know, all the theory about the treatment, all kinds of treatment of PTSD, the evidence-based treatment of PTSD, assume that trauma is in the past and now there is safety and there is a hopeful future. This is not the case in Palestine. Trauma is not from the past. There is no safety. There is deprivation of basic needs, and it's difficult to imagine a hopeful future unless in your abstraction and in your imagination. What can we do? Now, it's not up to us to meet those needs, but it is our responsibility to shout about that deprivation, about the political will to maintain the suffering and the deprivation of the people. And when we cannot intervene effectively to provide therapy because of the absence of these conditions, the safety and the basic needs, our role should shift. We become advocates, we become witnesses, we provide accompaniment, we insist that human rights and human rights and justice are important components of the mental health and the well-being of people. So the crisis in which Palestinians are living now, but it's not limited to Palestine. We have it in Sudan, in Congo, in Lebanon, in many parts of the world, should transform our responsibilities as mental health professionals. We cannot claim that we should continue pretending, doing the usual interventions, because they will not be effective in the absence of safety and the absence of basic needs. And we cannot say that there is nothing that we can do about it. We have a moral authority in the community. People look up for people in the health profession. People like to hear the perspective and the point of view of a mental health professional. So we should step out of our classical ways, a classical role within a clinic, and speak publicly about these violations. And we should challenge the institutions that are silent about this kind of violation for the basic human rights of people. We should challenge the concept of neutrality and impartiality in mental health, which is usually misunderstood as not being vocal on the political conditions that create suffering. In Palestine, we talk about the ethics of non-neutrality. We are not neutral when it comes to torture, when it comes to genocide, when it comes to political violence that inflicts suffering. So I want to draw a parallel between this and the role of a doctor during the pandemic. The role of the doctor was not only to treat the person who caught the virus, but also to spread messages regarding public health. keeping distance, hygiene. And I think we need to take care of those who are in distress due to the conditions of political violence, but we need also to speak about political violence and expose it. That's our public health responsibility, in addition to the clinical work that we do.
So we're not neutral, and politics is a public health emergency. This is how we feel it. And before asking the question, Ghayda, I would like to invite those who are with us today in person or online to start thinking about, or even not thinking of, but if they have questions, please start asking them so we can respond in due time, whatever, make better use of our time. Ghayda, you're not silent. And you're using your voice in many places while acknowledging that this advocacy work, the voice needs to be well balanced in a way to be able to keep on making it heard and present in this space. Last year, you took the initiative and you organized a conference on resisting colonizations that is becoming a collective. I was honored to take part of this process, and this is how we met Samah, and this is the essence of relationship, because it's not an encounter once upon a time. It's a commitment. It's a continued relationship. How do you place that collective resisting colonizations, and how this? I would not say it initiative. I would not say project, but this is the way of doing things collectively would meet this decolonization process within and with the way we do work.
I think that was when the collective started, it was really also a personal shout, as Samah was saying, and it was a personal gesture of freedom. And I like the word collective because this is what it is, as you're saying, Zeina. Initiative, it's not so much, it's a collective. It's us together, building us, rebuilding us, taking care of each other, amplifying our voices, and most importantly, using the agency and the power that we have, because we do have power, agency, and means in our different positions and institutions, to try to do our best to carry the voices. One of my dear Palestinian friends who arrived from Gaza recently said, don't stop talking about us. Keep our voices. Tell our story. And this is, I think, what the collective does, because speaking about what Samah was saying about the ethics of non-neutrality, the concept of neutrality has been so misused to silence people that you cannot be neutral in the face of moral, ethical, and political bankruptcy. You just cannot. Neutrality would be bankruptcy in this situation. And I think it is highly important to remind that for mental health practitioners, that, and as one, Gabrielle has, the title of her thesis is "The Political is Intimate," is to bring back the importance that our mental health is deeply affected by political decisions around us, and that we have the responsibility to stand against, I'm going to say the word, to stand against simplified binary perceptions, and most importantly, to carry the voices and continue saying that this cannot continue. It's just, I have no words anymore. I mean, it is just the worst of humanity manifesting itself in an era where there is so much power to stop this, so much capacities across dominant, rich, industrialized countries to stop those profound exploitations of many colonized nations and many nations in the southern hemisphere, if I can say, because there's this north-south relationship also that we must not forget about.
Yeah. And while waiting for the questions from our guests, Samah, can we learn more about the book that you recently published?
I'm working on another book, so I forgot what's in the first one, but let me. It's a collection of articles inspired by my encounters with colleagues, with patients. So, for example, there is one article in that book that questions what is being distributed in Gaza with the name dignity kits, hygiene kits, distributed by MHPSS program, funded by the same governments that send drones to spy on the people in Gaza and provide data, digital data, to facilitate their assassination. So they send them hygiene kits. They call it dignity kits. And so it's an imposition of whose concept of dignity is this? It's not the Palestinian concept of dignity. Dignity is far more elaborate and sophisticated than a soap and a toothbrush. And it's being provided as a false charity to shed the feeling of guilt and complicity away from the same governments who facilitate who enabled genocide. So that's an example of the things that I write on the crossroad. My writings are on the crossroad between the political and the psychological, which is personal and intimate, as you said. But let me tell you something more recent that usually I don't write a book from the book is not one text. It's a collection of articles. But I want to give you another example to talk about the importance of making the contextual and historical analysis of the symptoms that people bring to the clinic. I received a 14-year-old boy who was very good in his studies, but he wants to stop going to school. And he tells his family that he's afraid of dogs. So the family brought him so that I help him to desensitize his fear of dogs. And usually they expected me, because they were told, they read on the internet, that he needs gradual desensitization, CBT. What is missing is his relationship to dogs and what he heard about dogs. So it's not only the gradual desensitization that would work. The boy needed to talk about the settlers unleashing their dogs at school kids in Palestinian villages in Area C. He needed to talk about the weaponization of dogs, training military dogs to rape Palestinian prisoners. So this fear of dog is not simple xenophobia. It is related to the political context. This encounter with this boy provoked me to research the topic of dogs and fear of dogs for colonized and militarized societies. And here is a story from Haiti in the 19th century. What is now Haiti? In the early 19th century, when there was a French Revolution. So the occupying forces, the colonizing forces at that time, they needed help from France to face the revolution of the native people in that land. And they received dogs that are trained to devour black skin, Cuban dogs. They were trained, and I don't want to go into the process of how these dogs were trained because it's gruesome. How they were trained to desire and devour black skin. Interestingly, now the data in the US, very recent data from 22, I think, suggests that most of the serious injuries that need emergency room treatment caused by military dogs in the US is against black men, even though they are not the majority of the community. So there are certain symptoms that are very related to the history, to the politics, to the collective memory of people. When Colonel Rochambeau in Haiti received the dogs, the dogs that are supposed to eat the black men, he made a big scene in front of everybody, like a theater, a spectacle, where he tied a black man to a pole and unleashed the dogs in front of everybody. And that man was cut into pieces. He was devoured. So it remained in the minds of everyone who watched that scene that dogs can be horrifying, and they are an extension for the system of occupation and political control. And there are several stories like that from South Africa. So this is just an example of how we need to look much wider than the person and the clinical presentation and the clinical setting, the clinical office, and to bear in mind the political situation, the context, and the history in every evaluation we do for people.
Yeah. I want to continue from where you ended and think of that boy, 14 years old. And I'm just connecting with me when I was 17, 18, 19 years old, when Beirut was getting out of war, and the center of the city was rendered to rubber, and it's no life sign at all. Yet the herbs were just trying to find their way out. And we were told not to walk at night because dogs were getting nourished on who was under those rubbers. And it took me a long time to deal with my phobia from dogs, because I got this memory. And when you shared this story, it connected back with me. So thank you. Thank you. And it's an additional proof that sharing narratives is healing. So thank you for this, because it also verifies something that I lived, not only me as a person, but many from my generation who experienced that fear, and it needed time to heal. Douglas, do we have questions?
If anyone on Zoom has any questions, they could pop those into the chat and we could read them out. If anybody here in the space has a question, just raise your hand and I'll bring a microphone around. Does we have any? I'm not seeing any questions on Zoom at the moment.
Maybe.
Yes, please. While waiting for the question, go ahead, Samah.
I want to say something about the narrative, because, you know, when we are treating someone who had an individual time-limited trauma, when someone who suffers from PTSD, usually our work after establishing safety, we help that person to reprocess, to tell the story. And it is helpful for one person. When we are exposed to collective trauma, when the sequence of event is so intense, our brains cannot grasp everything that is going. Mm-hmm. And we are affected not only by what happens to us as individuals, but also to what happens to our neighbors, to our friends, to our family members, to other members in the community, to what we see on TV. And it's really difficult to pull together the narrative. That's why, instead of doing trauma-focused CBT and individual narrative therapy, which is useful if we have a car accident with a clear beginning and a clear end, when we are dealing with collective trauma caused by war and occupation and colonization, what we need is testimonial. We need to put together, to gather people who experienced a collective trauma. The journalists together, the doctors together, people from a certain neighborhood that was bombarded together, a group of children who lost family members, or a group of adolescents from a displaced, from a camp whose citizens, residents were displaced. And we need to facilitate for them to tell the story. No single person has the full story. And that's why it is difficult to heal as individuals if we don't do collective work. When we bring these people together, everyone will give a bit, a piece of the story. And then our work is to put together the different pieces of the puzzle to come up with a narrative with the collective memory. If we don't do that, it will be dispersed. And if you don't have access to it, it's difficult to heal. This is my association. I told the story of the boy. You brought up your story of fear of dogs in relation to the events in Lebanon. And I think this kind of encounter and dialoguing and group work is the important narrative and testimonial that we need in order to reprocess the collective trauma, which is much bigger than the trauma of a single individual.
Yeah, thank you for revisiting this and highlighting the importance of building up collective memory as a way of healing, but also as building a strong voice to speak about the dhulm, the intentional violence. Questions?
We do have a question coming in from Zoom, from Orev, who thanks you all for your stories and wisdom. Their question is, I'll read this. I am wondering if Samah and Ghayda can offer some thoughts on how to mobilize our teams in the mental health space to help each other center the political impacts of colonialism for our clients. And then they give an example. Are there working structures, for instance, that you have found useful in teamwork for these purposes?
Thank you, Orev, for your question. In terms of work structure, I think that one of the work structure that is a good space for this is really the communities of practice and the discussion times, like we call it, quote unquote, the case discussion times in a team, where often these are the privileged moments where you can share the stories from that have gone through you. And so not as, like the medical impersonal way of discussing the case, but rather the humanizing way of discussing a situation that comes through you, meaning talking about ourselves, how we experience that situation, and opening that discussion towards the potential impacts and effects. What is affecting? Why is this happening? I think within communities of practice, this is really a privileged space. Now, mind you, this means that the community of practice or that the team working together has to have done prior work on learning to be together in a space and to respectfully coexist, which really is, I don't think we can bring that in a space where a practitioner feels that there is absolutely no space to be as we are humans, not just a title. And so my first advice would be to start creating those spaces. And there are techniques of how we create those spaces. You can reach out to Zeina, she's very experienced in this. And then to bring back those discussions. It's highly important. And some professions are a little bit more familiar with the impact of the economic and political on one's life compared to maybe the typical psychology or psychiatry profession. So inviting those professionals who work in defending right, in advocating, in social work, in community organization, in grassroots work, in indigenous healing work is really key to help make those spaces grow.
Samah, do you have an answer?
Yeah, maybe I will add a few things. I totally agree with the insights of Ghayda, but I would like to add, to bring to your attention the courses that we did not have
Of course.
in our schools. A decolonial approach to mental health. This should be taught. This should be part of the curricula, part of the teaching of psychology students, psychotherapists. A critical human right-based approach to mental health is also an important topic. We need to create opportunities for education where people meet together as peers and think critically. It's not a one-sided approach of teaching where someone knows everything and the others are recipients, but to create workshops where people bring the challenges, people who work with refugees, people who work with racialized, marginalized communities, they need to bring their challenges and dialogue about it. And from here, critical thinking will emerge in our profession. And there is something on my wish list that I would like to bring up. I think that we need to provide mental health professionals who challenge mainstream ways of conducting our profession, who challenge the institutions, or who simply don't challenge them, but the institutions get annoyed by what they do. We need to provide them with advocacy and legal support, because we have many examples in different parts of the world where doctors and mental health professionals were sanctioned, were punished for their ethical position on Palestine or on other human rights causes. So I think it is important to provide psychological and legal support for those who suffer because of their position and being vocal on a different approach to mental health. That's part of the empowerment that they need.
We do have another question.
Okay.
I will read this one. This question is from Guillaume. Guillaume says, "Thank you so much for your profound insights and narratives. I have a question about the older generation's view of getting psychological support. My father, a 91-year-old Palestinian, now living in Canada, always says to me, when living through difficult situations, 'I'm fine, I've lived through much worse things than this,' and often follows with, 'What a miserable life,' and of course laughs a bit. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about speaking with older adults and how they might be allowed or invited to ask for psychological support."
Well, if he declares that he's fine, he is probably fine. I would say that psychotherapy, like the conventional psychotherapy, should be the last thing that you propose to him. I would suggest family support, family gatherings, meeting with peers, with people of his age, other compatriot if he's outside his homeland. All of that can help. Sometimes simply by meeting members of the community for a nice meal and people talk spontaneously, this can be more effective than the conventional psychotherapy. I would not offer psychotherapy for anyone who does not feel and declare the need for it.
And this brings also back the intergenerational gatherings and the importance of having that space where voices coming from different times, spaces meet and encounter each other without the expectation that this voice is coming from trauma, but the fact that they made it to now, it's also a voice of agency.
I think one of the things that I would add is many of the people who came from colonized or war-torn countries, Palestine, but other countries in the Arab world as well, and elsewhere, when they came, they tried not to talk so much about their origins to their children, sometimes not even transmit the language, because they knew what it would mean in terms of exclusion or marginalization of their children if they would do that. So they did it to help and protect their children appear and be as Canadian as possible. I think that maybe one of the ways is for those children to tell their parents that they are okay, that their parents don't need to worry about this anymore. And maybe one way of helping is for these children, if they want, to open the space for sharing for their parents. So I don't want to psychologize or interpret anything, Guillaume, here, or anybody who's listening to us, but an invitation to know your parents' history. our parents' history is sometimes very liberating for our parents who have had to silence a lot of things to help us learn the local language and integrate into society, and can be much more healing for the entire family actually than just the, for the parent themselves.
And maybe I will add something to this also, because I observed that many young people who are children of immigrants or children of refugees, they sense their own suffering, but they know that their parents suffered more. Yeah. And so they feel reluctant to seek help, because if their parents are not complaining about what they went through, they realize that their parents went through difficult things. But if the parents are not asking for help, how can they ask for the help? So it becomes a barrier for them, because they feel that they are less legitimate to complain or to suffer because someone in their family suffered more, and they are going about their life without any help. So they feel that they don't deserve help, or that their complaints are pale in comparison to the experiences of their parents.
Any question, Douglas, before we close?
There is one question I will read out from Tal Ama. Says, thanks, of course, for the deep, engaging conversation, but has a question about working with Palestinian lived experience. And they say, I would be very interested in hearing your perspectives on how to approach Palestinian subjectivity without reducing it either to trauma or to resistance as fixed categories. And more specifically, how could researchers and clinicians attend to the everyday, relational, and often contradictory ways that Palestinians live, remember, and make meaning? And it's especially in the contexts of ongoing violence and in the diaspora, while remaining ethically accountable to the political conditions that shape these lives.
That's a wonderful question, and I would, when my Palestinian friend tells me, tell our story, this is what she's meaning. She's meaning that tell our stories in a way, because you're right, there's a lot of tendency now to try to categorize, right, the Palestinian identity into one type of identity or one type of existence because of the nature of the situation itself right now that is very polarizing, but also because it can be then easily instrumentalized to then further attack that identity and, put any sort of names to justify further violence towards that identity. Tagging the identity, targeting it, and politically instrumentalizing it to represent it as further threatening and justifying further violence. So I fully agree. Part of putting up front the voices and the narratives is to I'm sorry, it's the wrong word to say rehumanize, but we are to that stage. The Palestinians have been systematically dehumanized, objectified. And to rehumanize is to tell those diverse stories, those diverse way of existence, the diverse opinions, practices, cultural, food, the diverse way of beings of Palestinians and Palestine, and not just the people, the villages, the trees, the food, the art. So this is very important because it is exactly a way to fight against erasure, but also to fight against the colonial process itself, which is the dehumanizing and reduction of a very heterogeneous group of people into one simple entity, encouraging internal violence to whomever deviates from that entity or identity. It is a process of social identity imprisonment. And this is not internal to any group. No one group reduces naturally its identity into one factor unless it is threatened and brought to do that. And so thank you for this question, because it's really a beautiful question.
Samah, do you would like to comment on
Yeah,
this?
I totally agree with what Ghayda said. And I think usually it is the stories that are told from people who are distant from Palestine that reduces Palestinians to either victims or heroes. The closer you work with Palestinians, the more you are able to see the diversity within different Palestinians. And even for the same people, for the same person, there are different moments. I will bring an example of my recent work with doctors, family doctors in Gaza. I conducted a training for WHO to expand the capacity of family doctors to provide mental health support to their patients. I trained them on the image gap. First, I was surprised how dedicated they are. They brought up cases, presented cases, they talked about their patients, they had challenging questions. They also had the opportunity to talk about their difficult experiences during war. On the last day of my training, I noticed that they were less focused. They were busy with something. And then I heard Zagharit. How do you say that in English? Luluation?
We do
Yes.
it, yeah.
Yes. So on that day, I was training them online on Zoom like this. And then they explained to me that their children, some of them, their children passed the high school exams. And so they were busy waiting for the results. So it's not only trauma that comes from there.
Yes.
People get happy for simple achievements. People are curious. They compete with each other. They want to put themselves in the service of the community. So I think it's a very colorful picture. And those same people, if you talk to them about what happened to certain family members, they will break into tears and they will express distress. So that's the complexity of human beings. And it is important to also be able to see the capacities and the strength of those people, because this is what helps us support them in dealing with the difficulties.
I would like
And,
also to recall, I'm sorry.
I just also there's a part of the question about the researchers and clinicians and so on. I was surprised in the midst of war. I received some consultations from Gaza, and in some consultations, a woman was like, I expected people complaining of bombardment, of loss, and so, but a woman was complaining about her mother-in-law. That was the thing that was annoying her more than anything else. So, of course, there are also in the clinic, people usually come with with the usual complaints, somatic pain, relational problems, functioning problems related to sleep, related to sexuality. In the background of their stories, you will hear the stories about political violence and colonization. It is existent in the presentation of everybody, but usually people don't put it forward because there is a sense of normalcy, because they assume that the doctor knows that we are living under occupation, there is bombardment, there is political detention. So they don't put that forward. They start talking about the thing that is more individual, that touches their life and disturbs their balance in most recent days. But in the background, the political story exists.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those colorful aspects of lives as well. I wanted to recall also my researcher voice and invite us, me included, to be very concerned and concerned with the ethical representation when it comes to narratives, because coming also from indigenous perspectives on research methodologies, sometimes the urge to speak on behalf of others might be as hurtful as the intentional violence. So we need to be very careful and cautious when we invite others to share stories, to be aware about from where we come, what's our intention, and why we're doing this research, if ever the word research is to be used from a decolonial perspective. On those notes, I would like to thank you, Samah, Ghayda. I like Samah because of the ha, comes from the heart, but also because of the meaning. It's about forgiveness, but also it's about allowing a space. And Ghayda is about also giving the best as much as possible to everyone. So thank you for reminding us that mental health cannot be separated from dignity, history, and the intimate politics. And that care rooted in community and story can be a way of holding on to life. Because there, in community, we feel that we're not one, we're many. And from the lens of Inuit, in what we call now Quebec, I would like to visit Josephine Bacon's poetry as a way also to honor those lands on which we are living here in Quebec, in Canada. Her poem reminds us about the need to be rooted in ancestral memory, land, and the persistence of belonging. She says, "Je ne me souviens pas toujours d'où je viens. Jamais mes origines ne me quitteront. I do not always remember where I come from. My origins will never leave me. نادراً ما أتذكر من أين أتيت، لكن جذوري تسكنني ولن تغادرني أبداً."
Beautiful.
Thank you, Zeina. Let's clap. Thank you all. It was a powerful way to start our year here. Thanks again. And thank you all for your online, for your questions. Really wonderful to see those. Just gonna let you know, we're gonna close up the Zoom and the live stream now, but this does remain available on our YouTube channel, and you can revisit it and share it from there. And you should also have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.